Greetings and welcome to In Depth. I'm Dike Rostant, CEO of the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator and United Nations Global Ambassador for Race to Zero and Race to Resilience, Raquel Moses. She joins us in the wake of COP27 to give us a realistic look at where we are and where we should be. Hello, ma'am. Thank you so much for making the time. I want to start off by asking about the main differences to your view between COP26 and COP27. Thank you.
You know, it's really interesting. The difference from my perspective between COP26 and COP27 is that COP27 was far more focused on loss and damage, while, there were rumblings about loss and damage at COP26. And I thought that there was momentum towards private sector participation in COP26. COP27 really solidified a decision on loss and damage moving forward. And that is, how does the global north compensate the global south for the damage that we're incurring as a result of the carbon that's in the atmosphere? So I think it was quite a momentous occasion. It was a coup just to have it on the agenda, but to have a decision on loss and damage was really, really huge. And I think the global pressure had been mounting. And certainly we've seen far more pledges. Last year we left COP26 with about $2 million worth of pledges towards loss and damage. And then over the course of the year, we were able to get that to 20 million. It is now at 230 million. So quite a bit of progress towards loss and damage, which I think is a huge win for everybody coming out of COP27.
And you said the pledges is one thing, and that's astounding, but from two to over 200. But you also spoke the last time about COP26 being, yes, there's some work happening, but it still seems as though tipping point wasn't there in terms of action. Things weren't rolling down the hill as quickly as you would like them to. It feels as though this one is a little different.
It was different, but not necessarily in that way. I think what's happening is that people are starting to take matters into their own hands. So we're seeing places like Vanuatu and Tuvalu start legal challenges to how do we pay for the damage that we're incurring. And so you're seeing a lot of outside of the negotiation action taking place. And while I think the negotiations remain incredibly paramount in terms of importance as to how we move forward, I think people are also realizing that things continue to move far too slowly. And so it isn't just one solution. It's going to be apply pressure from all sides. Uh, Certainly the national governments are going to have to negotiate with each other to come up with solutions, but non-state actors, so that's everybody who's not a state. So it's the city, it's the private sector, it's the NGOs, it's the civil society. All of these actors are going to have to actively participate in either taking decisions, moving things forward, engaging in projects, engaging in legal action, or doing something, because this requires all hands on deck. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the verdict is that this was far more action than COP26. I think we got as much action as we can expect, but you're seeing everyone take matters into their own hands.
And I really like the fact that you raised that point, because that brings me to you, speaking about your why for being at the helm of Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator, representing 28 countries. Do you see enough of you around in terms of persons who get it and they're pursuing issues to mitigate climate change aggressively?
You know what I'll tell you? There have been some amazing young people that have inspired me, that have wowed me, that have um, I'm so confident in our ability to overcome these challenges based on the kind of talent that we have coming up in the ranks. We had a phenomenal contingency of young people at COP27. And that was certainly, while we had a number of young people at COP26, I think there were even more. This was the first time there was a youth pavilion and more specific actions towards based on the youth and the youth being heard. So I feel really confident. I'm the least of them, and I'm delighted to be, because we are going to need our most extraordinary people, uh, everyone doing what they have to do to meet these targets and to keep the pressure on, certainly at the state level, the government level, but also understanding how do we hold the companies that we do business accountable? How do we hold, the people, the NGOs accountable? How do we track? I think I spoke at like 5 different events on transparency. How do we increase the amount of information that is available so people understand where we are against the goals? And we don't use that as a stick to beat everybody up with, but we use that to take a sober look at, okay, we're not meeting the mark, we are not hitting the goals that we've set. What do we need to do? And so that is that gave me a lot of a lot of confidence, especially in the youth and the number of activists that were there.
I want you to speak about those activists a little more, please, Ms. Moses. And I say that for 2 reasons. One, there were some faces of youth who were present. I'm thinking of one specifically who was there at COP26 that wasn't necessarily there at COP27. And it seems as though there was a lot of focus on that individual more than the issues that that individual was trying to raise. And then there's also the example of the Commonwealth Youth Parliament that has been going on. I think it's finishing on the 24th. And there was a representative from one of those small island developing states that is kind of close to Australia. And apparently in her presentation, she was so full of enthusiasm, passion, she broke down. She had to take a moment because she is seeing the difference that climate change is making. So in terms of, is it the energy? Is it the issues? Are there solutions? What is it about these young voices that are coming to the table and sharing that has you so enamored with them?
And I'm talking about, and what I just talked about, I'm talking about solely Trinis. Huh? I'm not even talking about outside of Trinidad. We had a lot of Trini activists and Trini youth who were there at COP doing amazing things, and it made me so proud. But also we had youth from Vanuatu, we had youth from Pacific Islands, we had youth from Mexico, we had youth from Colombia, we had lots of indigenous youth, and they understand what they're about. They understand the impact that we're having, and they are taking personal risk in protesting, in getting involved, and while it's easy for the media to sort of pick one shining star and say, okay, that's the climate activist. There are many climate activists, especially those who are on the front lines in the global south, being impacted by the changes, standing up in knee deep water, trying to get to school. And those are the voices that we need to hear more from, because those are the people who are seeing the changes that are taking place, and they're seeing their future just kind of fading away. And so they are the ones who will hold us all accountable, because they want a different future. They want a brighter future. They want hope. And that's what we owe them that much. And that's what gives me hope for the future, because the people for whom the stakes are highest get it.
And we continue this conversation when we return from the break. We're speaking with the CEO of Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator, Raquel Moses. Stay with us. We return with more. Welcome back. We are speaking with the CEO of the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator Program, Raquel Moses, and we're doing so in the aftermath of COP27. But Ms. Moses, I want you to connect some dots for me, please, in terms of working towards a green energy ecosystem versus individuals trying to create their individual wheels.
So, of the things that get me most excited, it is the opportunity for the Caribbean to become the center of the world as it relates to the export of green hydrogen. Right now, we have copious amounts of renewable energy, and in order to make green hydrogen, which many consider the last mile fuel, the fuel of the future, the fuel that will help us to decarbonize the hard to decarbonize sectors like shipping, like aviation, like heavy machinery. And it does so much without producing carbon emissions. And we have the expertise in Trinidad to be able to create hydrogen, and the requirement for commercial levels of renewable energy. And in the Eastern Caribbean, we have more renewable energy than domestic use would ever take up. And so there's an opportunity to collaborate between the Eastern Caribbean and the Southern Caribbean and to create one market that allows us to export green hydrogen to places like Germany, Japan, the US. The US has gone with their Inflation Reduction Act and included huge subsidies for the things that they believe will be the future of energy. And so things like solar, things like green hydrogen. And we need to take the opportunity of this growth in this market where the winners and losers have not yet been defined. Thousands of projects have been announced across the globe, and many of the projects that we are working on within our region are the furthest ahead. There are projects in French Guiana, there are projects in Dominica, there's New Gen in Trinidad and Tobago, and there's so much that we have the capacity to do. We always punch well above our weight, and this is one future-proof solution on energy that we should not allow to pass us by.
Sometimes when we talk about collaboration, Ms. Moses, it feels as though people feel as if I don't have the controlling hand, I don't want any part to do with it. And so how do we make these partnerships work within the Caribbean as opposed to saying, okay, well, we need to get somebody from outside, even though we're punching above our weight, to one, invest heavily, two, validate the efforts. How do we treat with that?
So there was a lot of talk at COP about we need to rethink our system. So it isn't about let's have a better oil and gas. It's like no, we need to rethink energy completely. And I think this is one of those things. We need to rethink collaboration. We need to rethink our size in the region and understand that we are better and bigger together and not separate. And while there is room for individual small projects, I think microgrids will be a huge part of our energy future. We also need to understand that we rely on each other more than we give ourselves credit for relying on each other. And there is but one chance for us to work together to create this single energy market. If Trinidad, for example, was to invest in offshore wind, in order to get that offshore wind to the price point that would make sense for us and for our industry, we would have to do it at such a huge scale that it would not make sense to only produce what we need, but to produce excess that we can then use to help support others. That and again engage in that exchange where we're buying and selling renewables. We're using renewables to create things like green ammonia, green methanol, green hydrogen. So we have to start thinking about things differently. We are not in competition with each other, and we need to disabuse ourselves of that. We are in the business of collaboration because unless the small ones like us band together, we don't have a very bright future. And that is, our only option is to collaborate.
Once again, that reminds me of Professor Emeritus Rex Nettleford saying if we don't hang together, we'll be hung separately. But I really appreciate the fact that you're saying that things are still very fluid in terms of seeing who the players are and who has control of certain things. But you also said the last time we spoke that there's money to be made in the blue economy. And we see in terms of projects, Barbados got some of that money. Do you see any factors that we can use here to access some of similar opportunities? Is it a feasible plan, dynamic committed leadership, luck? How do we replicate or have our own version of that?
I think Barbados is doing amazing, and I'm so proud of them and their representation on the global stage. I think that we're doing a lot too. I think we're not necessarily good at PR as to what's happening in Trinidad, while acknowledging that there's a lot more that we could and should be doing, without question. I mean, most of the Eastern and Northern Caribbean have single-use plastic bans in place, and we have been talking about it for ages and haven't put anything in place. We have a lot of capacity to do, and we are also doing really like I'm quite proud of National Energy and NGC. They're doing a lot, and they have a Carry Green website that has a lot of information. And I think one of the things that people need to do is to get informed. So we definitely need to sing our own praises a little bit more. And I spoke to a lot of international media from New Zealand, media from the UK, media from the US, CNN. And in all of those media people that I talked to, I said, you're not telling our stories. And that's part of the problem because we only hear about the people who are emitting the carbon, or they're doing such wonderful things. I'm like, you don't understand. They're the ones who've created the problem. You have to highlight the stories of the people who are solving the problem. And everybody from Bahamas doing amazing things, Bermuda, Jamaica, St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Lucia. St. Lucia has a number of entrepreneurs that have exciting projects. Grenada doing amazing things to protect their coastline that we should all learn from. So it's about figuring out what the centers of excellence are across the region, highlighting those stories, and collaborating towards. Okay, so Barbados has figured out how to access funding from the global stage. How do we learn what they're doing and figure that out? They've also figured out solar water heating. What did they do? What are the policies that they use? What are the incentives that they use that made that work so well for them? And likewise, Jamaica has a really great and dynamic market. Costa Rica is one of only 7 countries on the earth that can run almost exclusively on renewable energy. There are centers of excellence within this region, and we need to keep talking to each other. We need to keep singing our own praises. We need to keep telling our stories, and we need to support the entrepreneurs that we have that are creating new solutions.
And I think that even goes back to the point that you were making of not necessarily even trying to duplicate efforts sometimes, but build on what is there already. And speaking of that, I know that there have been conversations for a while in Montserrat with regard to geothermal. I think there is something that is further ahead in Dominica. What are some of those things that we can build on in terms of saying, okay, well, you have this, we have this, let us work together, and what would some of those things look like?
Yes, amazing, amazing question. So Dominica, in terms of the readiness of the region to produce geothermal as a source of renewable energy, is the furthest ahead. Now, when you talk to Nevis, they'll tell you they're either ahead or right behind. From what we're looking at, I would imagine that they are at least 6 months to a year behind Dominica. But what we need to do is to help provide Dominica with support, because Dominica unlocking their geothermal potential provides unlocks a lot of capacity within the region. So if we were to, for example, what we're working on in a single energy export working group is to connect Dominica with Trinidad for the purpose of using renewable energy to produce green hydrogen, and to have collaboration of the 5 islands in between using that same link. So those are the kinds of collaborations that we need to do. And we all need to get behind Dominica to get them to explore their 6 geothermal zones. And once that happens, then say, okay, Nevis, you're next. What do we need to do to help you to get that online? Because once we all get our energy mix right, once we all have our energy independence, it frees up a lot more commerce. The other thing that we need to solve is aviation and connectivity in the region. We are so
You see,
easily
that
connected with the
conversation,
US and not easily
Ms.
connected with
Moses,
each other.
that conversation is one for another day, and I'm really happy to have it with you. But that's a Pandora's box at a point in time we don't have the time. But thank you very much,
No
and I think
problem.
we hope we can speak a little in a shorter space of time as to what can be done as we try to educate ourselves or people, and how it is we can move forward as a collective. But we thank you very much for the time that you've shared with us. And on behalf of the entire news team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth with me. Thank you so much for joining us.